session. My name is Joy Pigozzi, and I'm the director of the Educated Child program. This session is really important to us for a number of reasons. I think that, to begin with, Educated Child is a program that looks to work with partners to identify and enroll out-of-school children at the primary level. We work really for the hardest to reach. We look for those who are really the last mile. Even before COVID, that was over 59 million children. So what we are trying to do with our partners is to provide these children with a quality education, something that gives them the foot up, the step ahead to actually participate in the kind of lives that you and I enjoy and take for granted every day. So for us, when we look at a quality education, we really have to think a little bit about what do we mean? And there's an enormous focus right now on examinations, making sure you reach the mark. Have you learned? But for us, the question is also, what have you learned? And have you learned enough of it? So as we go forward, I think we want to really focus today on looking at physical education and sports as part of a quality education. Thinking about education as something much bigger than reading, writing, and arithmetic, but something that teaches us to be whole people, that teaches youngsters how to make better decisions, how to make the kinds of decisions that enable them to become the people they want to be, but also to be good citizens in terms of their families, the children they will raise, and the countries where they live. So for us too, we live in the country that is going to host the World Cup next year. There's an enormous focus on sports, but what kind of focus? What kind of sports? So those are some of the questions that we've asked our panelists to address. And as we go forward, I just want to then introduce our moderator. Our moderator is Dr. Joannie Bewa. And as educators, we really love people who promote education, and she's one of them. We really appreciate that. She is a physician, a practicing physician, but also studying for a doctorate in, I think it's, you're studying for the doctorate in public health, I believe. I think that's, I'm sorry about that. She is well known as an advocate. She works as an advocate for all the SDGs. She's also an advocate for the Bill Gates Foundation, where she works particularly on looking at monitoring the goals and how we are doing. So it is with great pleasure that I introduce Dr. Joannie Bewa and ask her to lead the panel. Thank you, Joanna.
Thank you very much, Dr. Pigozzi, for your kind introduction, but also for your outstanding and remarkable leadership at Educated Child, as well as your team's significant impact. First and foremost, kindly allow me to welcome our distinguished speakers on stage, as well as welcome our virtual panelists. Distinguished speakers, I would like to invite you on stage. Perfect. Honorable Minister, distinguished speakers, dear participants, welcome to the Quality Education and Sport for a Better World panel, organized by Educated Child, a program of Education Above All Foundation, during the 2021 WISE Summit. Education is the most powerful weapon to change the world, said Nelson Mandela. And I'm even tempted to say, holistic quality education is the most powerful weapon to unmute our generation. There is no doubt today that education, physical activity, and sport are critical components of quality education because they build soft and hard skills. They build bridges, they build resilience, self-confidence, self-esteem, but they also promote mutual understanding and the realizations of the Sustainable Development Goals, including peace, justice, sustainable planet, health, equity, and many more. As Dr. Pigozzi said, today is the best time to have this conversation because we also know that Qatar will be hosting the FIFA World Cup 2022. How can quality education, SDG 4, inclusive sports and physical activity be harnessed to build a better and inclusive world with peace, justice, and sustainability? How are we currently building on the multiplying the ripple effect between sport and quality education for all, including underserved, marginalized, in and out of school children? Today, our panel of experts will share their perspective. So I will introduce them. We do have 3 speakers on the stage and 2 speakers attending virtually. First, I would like to introduce the Honorable Minister Mustapha Ussif, Minister of Youth and Sport, the Republic of Ghana. Honorable Minister is also a member of the Parliament representing the Yagaba Kubori constituency in the northeast region of Ghana. He has pledged as a minister to help develop Paralympic sport in the country. And prior to his ministerial appointment, he served as executive director of the National Service Scheme. And Minister Mustapha is joining us online. Mr. Robert Jenkins is the Global Director of Education for UNICEF, an organization he joined in 1995. He brings over 2 decades of experience in international development, humanitarian programming in Africa, Asia, and Middle East. He served as UNICEF Deputy Representative in Jordan, Deputy Director at the Division of Policy and Strategy in UNICEF headquarters, and also served in many countries. Welcome. Ms. Jojo Ferris, who is joining us online. She is the head of the Olympic Refugee Foundation and responsible for the social development through sport unit at the International Olympic Committee. She managed the Australian government $35 million Sport for Development program, the Pacific Sport Partnership, and she was the continental manager at the London Organizing Committee for the Olympic and Paralympic Games. Welcome, Ms. Ferris. Mr. Fabien Dilem is the General Manager of the Regional Office for the Middle East and India for Paris Saint-Germain FC. He has 30 years experience within the club based in Paris and moved to Doha to open and handle the regional office. In this position, he is in charge of representing the club in the concerned territories on relationship management, business development, marketing, and corporate social responsibility. Welcome, Mr. Dilem. Mr. Nick Soar is the Senior Refugee Sports Coordinator at the UN Refugee Agency headquarters in Geneva. His team works with sport and non-sport actors to leverage the potential of the sport ecosystem for people who have been forced to flee. He has more than 2 decades experience of developing partnership for and working with children and youth in global north, global south, development, and humanitarian contexts. Distinguished panelists, welcome.
Thank you so much.
So, Honorable Minister, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you.
Perfect.
Very clear.
Perfect. So I would like to start with you and really would love to hear your perspective. In the room, we have participants, experts, distinguished speakers who are really looking forward to know, as your role as a leader of Ghana Ministry of Youth and Sport, what are some of the key policies that are in place to help merge quality education in sport for your citizen, but also how have these programs benefited your country? Over to you, Excellency.
Thank you so much. But first of all, I want to thank the organizers for putting up this very, very important event together. Unfortunately, I couldn't join physically in Doha today, but I'm joining virtually here from Accra. I want to thank the organizers for this very wonderful event, and we are excited. I'm so excited to be part of this panel to discuss how holistic our education can play to have very positive impact on our children and the young one across the globe. The Ghanaian government understands the vital role or the important role that sports play in the development of our children and the young people. As the Minister for Youth and Sports, I'm fully aware of the need of critical integrated sports with children for the holistic development of children and the young people across our country. I am spearheading the implementation of the following policies to aid in the integration of quality education and sports for development of our children and the young people. Despite the fact that there have been several policy interventions, I want to highlight a few of these initiatives for the sake of this discussion. Physical education as a games and also as a recreation. This policy guarantees that sports is viewed as an important element of our education through developing abilities, an element of our education through providing recreation for children and young people in our schools. Schools are required in Ghana to provide time slots for games and sports activities in the general and under this regulation. The policy also allows for the establishment of curriculum and execution of sports instruction in the form of physical education for children and young people across our country. This provides opportunity for children physical and mental health development, as well as the development of creativity, inventiveness, skills, robustness, and discipline. It is also a forum for children and young people who want to pursue sports as a career. The establishment of sports departments in schools. So in Ghana, there is a policy that every school from the basic level up to the tertiary level have sports departments. Our aim has been to guarantee the enabling structures are not just established outside or on the periphery of schools, but also incorporated at the educational level. As a result of this program, sports departments are developed from the lowest educational level all the way to the highest institutions such as polytechnics and the universities. Indeed, we have the Ghana University Sports Association, for example, which allow the ongoing sports and educational mentoring of our children and young people along the educational ladder. The establishment of sports colleges is one of the policies that government have put in place. The sports colleges established under this policy are expected to give children and young people with the option to combine education and sports at the same time while studying. This idea is to train the young people with sports along education, ensuring that discipline, fairness, integrity of sports are instilled in the academic development. And the National Sports College is situated in Ghana in a place called Winba in the central region. My outfit is actually open to any potential investor that partner us to discover more and train talent for global sports market. And government also have given the private sector the opportunity to invest in sports colleges in Ghana. So there is incentives and policy direction of government to allow the private sector to play a critical role in sports development. And we have a model that the whole world can emulate, the Right to Dream Sports Academy, which was established 20 years ago. It has trained young men and women, children, and today most of them are sportsmen playing in a various international league across the globe. And we have a lot of graduates from this sports college, which was established by a private person because of government policy of allowing private sector to play this role. And most of them, those who could not also take sports as a career, had opportunity of going to Ivy League schools, some of them outside Ghana, and very, very prominent schools also in Ghana. We also have a policy, a scholarship and special concession for sportsmen and women in Ghana. This policy gives specific concession for children and young people in the educational system in order to promote integration, inclusiveness, cultivate smart, skilled through existing educational institutions. Special admission concessions are offered to children and young people with sporting skills to pursue education under this policy, which among stress span across the educational system from the basic level to the tertiary level. In reality, in order to strengthen the strategy, raising talent are granted particularly privilege in these security services following their study. So what we do, those who are identified as having some sports discipline are recruited into our security agencies so that whilst they are there, they will also be able to study and be given opportunities to develop their sport talents. The intellectual and skills development policy. We recognize that the youthful abilities grow through curiosity and increased engagement with like-minded others. As a result, the strategy of intellectual and skill developments strive to cluster children and young people in more suitable setting where they may not only learn, but also develop sports potential. As a result of this initiative, the ministry is building a youth resource centers across the country. And these facilities will have substantial number of infrastructure material, such as ICT training facility, which will be blended with sports. So to expatiate this policy, government 4 years ago decided to build youth resource centers across the country. And these youth resource centers was established in the then 10 regions and with a FIFA standard pitch at Titan tracks, ICT center, incubation centers, and these are 10 which are currently being developed simultaneously across the country. And government is doing so just to be able to give opportunity to all the young children in our country to be able to be trained in these facilities, in these youth resource centers. The annual organization of inter-schools and colleges games. This annual event, in order for Ghana to have the greatest talent representing our country in all athletic discipline, the ministry worked with the Ministry of Education, organized an inter-schools and colleges sporting competition in all districts across the country. So in Ghana, we have 261 districts in Ghana. Every year, we organize this sport discipline inter-schools for schools to compete in sports activities. The district winners compete against from another neighboring district to represent the region in a nationwide competition. And these tournaments are divided in 3 levels: the elementary, secondary, and tertiary educational level. The best of these young people are also chosen to represent our countries at the national teams. So throughout these competitions, we identify talent and they feed into our national team. And some of them are also given scholarships to go to tertiary schools. Some of them are given scholarship to even foreign institutions. So if you remember this year, the Ghana 4x100 athletes who were able to reach the finals in Olympics in Tokyo, most of them were identified through this inter-school sports competition. And they were given scholarship to study in our premier university, the University of Ghana. And now about 5 of them are currently in the United States on scholarship, studying in the various universities. So these are the dividends.
Mr. Minister, would you allow me to come back to you again? I would not want to cut you, but your perspective is really enlightening for this panel. You highlighted some of the key policies that your government are putting in place, from requiring time slots in schools, but also requiring curriculum for sport, building sport academies. But you also showed how your country, under your leadership, is bringing private sector on board. And we really want to come back to you on that second round to hear a little bit more about some of those experiences, if you allow me, Excellency Minister.
Very well. Thank you so much.
Okay. I would like to come to Mr. Jenkins from UNICEF, and I'm really excited to hear about your views about what is the relationship between education and sport and child well-being. But particularly for you, I would like you to challenge us on what we know and what we don't know.
Well, thank you very much. Thanks for this opportunity. Let me also thank Education Above All Foundation for this organizing all this, supporting us, and again for this opportunity to share my thoughts. I want to build on what His Excellency's phenomenal overview was in Ghana. From a global perspective, I don't think there's many of us in this hall here, but also online, that would argue against the importance of sports and development, and that link and the importance of development and contributing, providing opportunities of sports for each child to develop. The challenge, of course, is we aren't at the scale nor at the pace that is required. A recent report did show 3,000 different sports for development interventions around the world. UNICEF supports about 300 of those in close to 100 countries. But I think if we honestly asked ourselves, what is the situation for a marginalized child? Is it sufficient in terms of opportunities for them to participate in sports and to develop? I think we would all agree that a lot still needs to be done. And I do wonder, if we were holding this panel 30 years ago, would we be saying the same things about how important it is? And I terribly fear, unless something changes, we'll be having a similar conversation 30 years from now. So how do we change the course? I want to zero in on the issue of inclusion. And definitely over the last 20 months, the impact COVID-19 has had on education, on schools. Sports has taken a complete sort of reverse in the last 20 months, particularly for marginalized children. And when I say marginalized children, I guess we all have a view of who they are, what they look like. It's not 1 in 1,000 children, it's the majority of children living around the world. It's children living in poor countries, or children living in poor neighborhoods of wealthy countries. It's children that are disabled or different abilities. It's girls in many cases, particularly when it comes to sports. And it's children learning in a language that isn't offered in the school system, or living in remote communities. So you're into the majority of children do not have sufficient opportunities to participate in sports. Let me also just flag, and I'm going to be sensitive on the time, but when I talk about sports, I'm not talking about the elite, most competitive sports. I'm talking about just activities to engage and to play and to interact with peers. And do we have sufficient opportunity? Do children have sufficient opportunities? I think the reality is no. And yet, here on the panel, we're going to talk about how important it is. And the minister, you can see in Ghana, they've taken enormous initiatives across that incredible country, but obviously we're not moving at the pace. So why aren't we? Why do children not have sufficient opportunities? Particularly, again, the majority of children, which could be deemed as marginalized children around the world. I would argue I'll put three potential challenges that we're faced. One is sort of at the social norms or what we each think as parents is important for our children. We all want our children, I think, as parents to be successful, but what does often success look like? It's to be successful in passing an exam at the end of a high stakes period in a child's academic life. That tends to not adequately prioritize the ability of children to participate in sports or engage with other children. It's, as we all know, it's measuring success from memory, or how have they learned to add, or now those things are obviously very important. I'm not going to argue as director of education that foundational literacy and numeracy is not important. It absolutely is, but I do think we're currently across the world, including my own country in Canada, overly weighted towards narrow views of academics. So here as parents, we drive our kids to pass exams at the cost of a more holistic view of learning. So the answer has got to be engage with parents all over the world and engage with communication campaigns and interactions to convince people being a child is more than memorizing for a test, and definitely has to be a successful adult. Whatever successful adult may look like is to learn how to get along and interact and communicate, etc., which sports can lead very much to. Second, I know, I'm going to be quick. Second, I think we have systemic issues within education systems. Obviously, we have capacity building constraints. Teachers don't all feel comfortable engaging in non-academic subjects. We have infrastructure challenges in school systems. We have underfunding in education systems for sports and activities like this. So although we heard the opposite from the minister, is obviously an amazing example. How do we convince other ministers of education, or potentially more important, ministers of finance? I think those of us in education speak a lot to ministers of education about the importance of education, but I think ministers of education think education is important, and I do. I work in education. Engaging with those outside of the education sector on the importance of financing sufficiently sports for development, including, for example, the ministers of finance, I think critical. And actually, Mary and I were talking before, perhaps the best way to convince more ministers of finance to invest more is showcase examples like in Ghana or in other countries that truly have advanced sports for development quickly. The third and final challenge that I think we can collectively overcome is related to partnerships. Obviously, this can't be solved by ministers of education and ministries of education alone. The minister mentioned the private sector, community-based organizations, sports organizations, others that can provide other platforms for children to engage. I'm just going to conclude by sort of a wake-up call. I do indeed feel we're experiencing a crisis in education. We were before COVID-19. We absolutely are now. Sports for development is a crisis within that broader crisis. And so I think we do indeed need a step change in this work. Thanks. Thanks again for the opportunity. I won't be invited back, so I better say thanks.
No, your perspective is really enlightening, and I think you made a strong point about how we are going through a crisis during a crisis, but also seeing that as an opportunity to address the current crisis that we are going through. Social norms, partnership, multi-stakeholder approach were key proposals that you put on the table to make sure that in 30 years, we don't come back with the same conversation. I will move to Ms. Jojo Ferris, the head of Olympic Refugee Foundation. And I'm really excited to hear about your perspective about how foundations can help promote well-being and physical activities for children, whether they are in and out of school.
Thank you, Dr. Bewa, and hello to everyone, to the Minister and fellow panelists, and thank you for setting the foundations, Minister and Mr. Jenkins, to build on. Delighted to be here. Thanks also to Educate a Child and the organisers of WISE for putting together this important session too. To speak specifically to the role of foundations, I think often the reason foundations have been created is to fill a gap or to complement areas that are underfunded, understudied, are very niche, or seek a solution to an issue or problem that the founder has a strong connection to, be it as an individual or perhaps corporate identity. And in our case at the Olympic Refuge Foundation, we have a niche at the nexus of the humanitarian development and sport sectors. And it's also rooted in the fundamental principles of Olympism, which was really good to hear the previous two speakers talking about access and the importance of inclusion. I'll just read the first principle, which is that Olympism is a philosophy of life, exalting and combining in a balanced whole the qualities of body, will, and mind, blending sport with culture and education. Olympism seeks to create a way of life based on the joy of effort, the educational value of good example, social responsibility, and respect for universal fundamental ethical principles. I think that was raised in the opening remarks around this notion of education as a whole. The specific mandates for foundations is often not influenced or driven by political agendas. So foundations have an ability to commit longer term to the change we want to see, and as well having the flexibility to innovate along the way or fail forward, as we're fond of saying. So I'd look at foundations as key players to unblock, provide more flexible solutions and support, and potentially to leverage additional funds. And I'll share an example. When COVID reached Europe and our offices closed down in March, and many of the programs and partners around the world that we support had a similar situation, things changed in March, and by May, we were able to present a COVID response to our board that unlocked an additional $500,000, agreed to flexible funding arrangements to support our partners through the pandemic, and called for local solutions to the issues COVID was starting to pose. Being agile enough to be able to take this early position meant that partners like Generations for Peace and Right to Play in Jordan were able to move trainings online to continue to support their coaches, volunteers, and young people, and that Youth Sport Uganda could support their coaches with economic resilience and mental health support. Foundations are really ideally placed to convene diverse stakeholders, strengthen and empower networks, and generate influence, whether it be nationally, regionally, or globally. And we're able to take risks and explore emerging issues. And foundations play a really important part and role because we're essentially free to push other institutions. At the Olympic Refuge Foundation, we're working to shape a movement where young people affected by displacement thrive through sport. And we do this by bringing diverse stakeholders to work together to achieve collective impact. So in addition to the programming aspects I mentioned, we also have an Olympic Refuge Foundation think tank focusing primarily on the intersection of sport and mental health in displacement settings, and the Sport for Refugee Coalition that we co-convene together with UNHCR and SCORT, bringing more than 80 organizations committed to improving access for refugees to safe sport. So lots to say, but in short, foundations are uniquely positioned, being more flexible with regards to content and conditions of funding, and more able to take risks, as well as long-term approaches and perspectives. This makes it often easier to try out new approaches that are better suited to more innovative and locally led initiatives. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ferris, for your contribution. You really highlighted the role that foundation, the unique role that foundation are actually playing in terms of sport, physical activity, but also education. But you put a clear emphasis about your role in supporting refugee access to quality education, sport, but you also put a specific emphasis, for example, on how people can come together and think thoroughly about how to position refugees and support the access to education and quality sport. And that is a significant contribution, because when we talk about inclusion and diversity, we really want to make sure that no one is left behind. And building on that, the Minister of Ghana highlighted the role of private sector in improving access to quality education, but also sports. And I'm coming to you, Mr. Fabien Dilem. As a representative of a private sector, Paris Saint-Germain, can you please share with us how you see sport, how your organization is promoting physical activity, as well as education? And you are more than welcome to expand on some of your work with the Rohingya refugee in Bangladesh as well. Over to you.
Okay, thank you. First of all, thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure for me to be here today and be part of this panel on behalf of Paris Saint-Germain. So thank you for organizing this and thank you for the opportunity. Basically, I will start saying that Paris Saint-Germain is the club of the new generation, and youth education is part of our commitment, and we are promoting youth education in all our activities at different levels. I can give you a few examples, but for example, at the Professional Youth Academy, we're training our future stars, I would say, but we're not only delivering sports training, as well academic education, because we all know that they are not going to be all professional footballers in the future. So we're just accompanying them to be able to find an alternative option, I would say, if they don't become a professional football player. We're delivering as well this commitment through our Paris Saint-Germain Academy program that are implemented in 14 countries all over the world. Those are grassroots programs open to everyone with no skills selection. It's just about transmitting positive values, give them a Paris Saint-Germain experience and a Paris Saint-Germain training. But again, the main focus is on education and values, because we all know again that maybe 1% of these kids will be one day professional football players. So we need to support them to have a better life and to be a better man, basically. We are currently working on a new project, which is an esports academy. As you might know, esports is more and more stronger in the new generation, and we want to be able to build the right environment for those e-gamers to make sure that they're going to be able to have like a healthy lifestyle and not stay hours in front of the TV playing only. And then obviously the last one and not the least, our corporate foundation. We have a corporate foundation. We've been delivering programs to more than 250,000 kids over the last 20 years. We're targeting different community, different people. So we have programs for young adults. We're training them, giving them the right education to then be able for them to, share this experience and these skills with the new generation. So I'm talking about sports educators, for example. They are joining the foundation, studying at the same time, giving the professional experience from our side, and then some of them will start working at the PSG Foundation, and some of them will move to other sports organizations. Obviously, we're supporting underprivileged kids. We have different programs for underprivileged kids. We have a program called Go Girls, which is a dedicated program for women and young girls. We're taking them to different sports over 12 weeks. So every week they have a session in a different sports. At the end, what we want is we want to help them identify the sport they are the most comfortable with, and then we pay for them like a subscription to a sports club that they like. We have holiday camps and many various activities for the kids to take them to sports, basically. So yes, Paris Saint-Germain is again very, very committed to youth education, because as a football club, we're not doing only sports. It's all about education when it comes to child, and we are here to support them, because we know that most of those guys, they will never be professional football players. So we know we need to give them like different tools to reach their objective and to make sure that they will success in their professional integration, I would say.
And that is so impressive, because, as you said, sports is not just about competition, but it's also about how do we equip the human being to be successful, to be healthy, to be emotionally strong, to be confident, to be resilient. And I really like the diversity of program that you do implement, your corporate social responsibility, the Go Girls, but also engaging e-players. I think this diversity of innovation is really what we are looking for in sport. I did play soccer as an amateur when I was a child, and I can tell the significant impact it has on my individual, but also in my desire to be a better person. And I think this is the type of innovation initiatives that we want to see. This is the type of work that UNICEF, UNHCR, Paris Saint-Germain, the Refugee Foundation, and also the Ministry of Ghana are working on, and we are really looking forward to hear more.
And if I may, that's
sure.
very important point what you've said. In all our different sections and initiatives, whether it is the professional youth academy or the grassroots program, the main message is always, how can you be a better person? Not how can you become a professional football player. This come after. It's more about who you're going to be in the future.
And that is critical. Thank you very much for sharing. I will come to Mr. Saur, and I think the audience is also really interested to hear about some of your work. We've seen the major crisis, the major migration crisis that the world is witnessing, and really no one is protected against that. What are some of the challenges that refugees are facing specifically in terms of accessing quality education, in terms of accessing sports opportunities, and how do they use sports to really cope in this, significant crisis moment?
Okay, thanks, Joanna. I think it's important to start. We've heard the word refugees a couple of times already this morning. So let's talk about who we're talking about, and we're talking refugee children. It's 35 million children globally. Displaced children. That's 35 million globally. So 42% of the 84.2 million displaced. And that's a huge proportion, and 50% of refugee kids in particular are estimated to be out of full-time education. So it's a big issue. I think that for UNHCR and other organisations working in this space, it's a real challenge, and one that we're all looking to address in different ways, and sport is one of the mechanisms that we're looking to see how we can increase engagement, enrolment, and retention in school for refugee young people. So I think while there is an increasing trend towards inclusive education, enabling environments, some of the underlying issues that Rob discussed earlier and that we've heard about still exist, and these underlying issues prevent real progress being made in this space, and ensuring that all refugee young people can access quality education. So, and then the other factor that we have to consider is, of course, the COVID pandemic, which has exacerbated an already challenging area. So, if we take all of this into account, then what's the role of sport, and how can sport support young people who have been forced to flee by conflict and persecution? I mean, I guess for UNHCR and from our perspective, this is a relatively new area of work. And whilst there is a lot of evidence globally to say that that sport has a role to play in school retention, in young people's brain development, in the way that they can engage better in classes because they're more interested. We don't have the evidence in displacement contexts for this yet. So this is why it's really important that everybody who's speaking here today, from PSG to UNICEF to the Olympic Refuge Foundation, are all working to build a body of evidence that will help us to do what we're doing better. We all believe that sport has potential, but we need to actually refine that belief and prove it, and make sure that we're going to be acting on an evidence base. And then I think that from our perspective, so this belief is there. We believe that sport has a very strong role to play in the protection of young people. Not just by providing safe spaces to engage in sport in schools, but also because the capacity building, the life skills development that can be inculcated through engaging young people in sport and play-based activities can help them in the long run to protect themselves. And that's the ultimate aim is to develop capacities and skills for self-protection. So I think, again, there is a belief in the role of sport as part of a holistic education approach, but we're at the start of a journey. I think together we can move this forward and make some real progress.
And that is a great way, and I really like that optimism, because without optimism, we cannot drive our agenda. You really made a strong point about evidence, research, data, measurement. We cannot address an issue if we are not able to measure the issue and the significant impact it is having on children's life. And I think it is a critical one. But you also pointed out how important it is to make sure that we build individual as whole, we build capacity, and we tap into the power of sport. I want to stay with you again and very briefly for 2 minutes for the second round. Can you please share with us specific example from your field, from your experience, on how sport and education have helped refugees and IDPs access education and sport?
Okay, super quick. UNHCR and EAC have been working on a pilot initiative as part of our broader cooperation. This is an initiative where we're trying to integrate sport into primary schools. And we're doing this in two key ways. One is by training primary school teachers and refugee youth to become sports program facilitators, and they get a certified qualification as a sports program facilitator, and then they work with the schools and through the schools to deliver contextualized sports activities for young people in those particular contexts. So the four pilot locations are Uganda, Kenya, Rwanda, and Chad. And because of the contextualization in each of the locations, the way that the project manifests itself, but also the outcomes that we see are slightly different. So, for example, in Chad, what we see is that there was a very high uptake of young women to engage in the program and to become sports facilitators. And so it's actually really proven to be a very strong way of engaging adolescent girls and young women in sports program and changing the thinking around young girls and women's engagement in sport. In Kenya, where physical education has become part of the national curriculum, what it's done is it's managed to engage primary school teachers and then give them a formal qualification around how to deliver sports activities in the primary school. And so it builds on the national structures and provides additional capacity and confidence to deliver what they need to deliver in the school space. And I could talk a lot more about it, but 2 minutes.
I think those are great examples to share, because building capacity is key, but also training youth to be not just beneficiary, but also actors, but also trainers and facilitators is definitely key.
Yeah, and it provides them with future life opportunities, which is so important.
Exactly, and I think it is make sure that the program is actually sustainable and help build individual as one. And I want to make a quick point about the importance of making sure that countries where there are conflict, sports can be used as an opportunity to tap into youth potential, but also as a preventive measure in countries where there isn't yet, but where the sport can be used as an opportunity. For example, I've seen good example in Benin, Senegal, where young women practicing sport are kind of emerging, of course, and I'm sure these countries and others can probably learn from your program and experience as well. I want to come to Mr. Fabien Dilem, and as you shared some of the work that Paris Saint-Germain is achieving, can you tell us how we can balance sport in terms of well-being versus sports in terms of competition, and what can we do differently? Over to you.
To be honest, I think it's strongly linked. We do believe that at Paris Saint-Germain that sports is a unique way to help kids to gain more self-confidence, and competitive or recreational sports are again strongly linked from our point of view. So what I was saying is we do believe that it's strongly linked, and we had like a great example within the club. One of our former players, Nadia Nadim, was coming from an Afghan refugee camp, and she was playing at a professional level while studying to become a doctor. So that's exactly where the message that we want to spread. Basically, you can have like 2 different careers at the same time. You can do 2 different things at the same time and have 2 different objectives. And this is the main message from our side, basically.
That is really good to know. I heard about Nadia, and I think it's a good example about how you guys really integrate sport as competition level, but also sport as a driver for quality education. I want to move to Mrs. Ferris, and I really want to hear some specific example from your perspective on how sport can promote well-being and social cohesiveness between children and refugees. You are really welcome to share example, but what I would love to hear from you as well, how can we innovate as well?
Okay, thank you. And as you say, sport can be used as a tool to improve social inclusion, social cohesion, all the physical and or mental well-being. And what we do know, and interestingly to Mr. Saw's point, talking about data and evidence, we just had this reinforced by a joint evaluation with UNHCR that we conducted in Rwanda and Mexico, which is just reiterating the importance that the design of these programs and interventions has. Facilitating access to safe sport within the context of displacement spans numerous sectors, including protection, health, and education. And it's really key that we use the glue and the ability of sport to really bring these sectors together and break down some of those siloed approaches. So I'll share 2 brief examples because you asked for practical examples of the work of the Olympic Refuge Foundation pertaining specifically to well-being and social cohesion. And in the context of this summit, it's also worth pointing out, as Nick said, that sport can develop important soft skills and offer informal education opportunities through coaching, leadership pathways, and physical literacy. So in Turkey, we work with a consortium of partners led by the Ministry of Youth and Sport, together with the Turkish Olympic Committee, a local NGO, ASAM, and UNHCR. And the focus of this multi-year program is strengthening social cohesion and social inclusions through sport and sport sessions that are delivered across 5 major centres across Turkey and providing opportunities for both Turkish and predominantly Syrian youth to connect and play together. As I'm sure you know, Turkey is host to more than 4 million refugees, and the majority of them young people. So the need to ensure social cohesion, avoid perceptions of refugees, and taking opportunities to build trust within and between communities is critical. In 2020, despite COVID, the program engaged with more than 5,500 young refugees and host youth, providing access to safe sport. And from one term of delivery, we saw that 95 of the participants indicated that they had, through the sport courses, learned to solve problems without fighting. In Uganda, we're also working with a consortium of partners. And I think from today, we see that everyone understands the need to work together and really foster partnerships rather than trying to do this alone. Here, it's led by NGOC, together with the Ugandan Olympic Committee, UNHCR, Right to Play, and a local NGO, Youth Sport Uganda. And through this consortia, Game Connect was created, which is a program focusing on supporting the mental health of more than 10,000 young refugees and their host communities across various settlements and the urban slums of Kampala. WHO estimates 20% of people in post-conflict settings have depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress, bipolar, and during COVID, we've seen an even increased need for supporting mental health. So we, and I was glad to hear this echoed by other panelists, but we really want to shift the dial on how sport is viewed so that it's recognised as an important partner in improving the well-being and social cohesion of young people in refugee and host communities. I mean, it would be terrific, for example, in the context I just shared, to see the educational health sectors embed safe and inclusive sport across the education systems and mental health responses and frameworks, recognising it as an effective, low-cost, youth-focused intervention to improve their well-being and build social cohesion.
And I really want to piggyback on that last point that you made, the power of cross-sectoral collaboration. How amazing would that be to have programs where the health component, the sport, the education, and the mental health are all embedded and integrated to existing program. And I really want to move to that conversation and bring back on stage Mr. Jenkins. I really want to hear, some of your perspective about physical and also mental health, how should that be critical part of education. But most importantly, I want you to challenge us again. What do we need to do differently in terms of funding, in terms of allocating resources, in terms of addressing social norms? Over to you.
Well, thank you. And I really appreciate those examples from Turkey, Uganda, Nick mentioned, Kenya. I think hopefully people can hear me, but sure, thanks. Let's try this one, great. I think I'll use the brief time that I have to just flag that we all recognize the impact COVID-19 and school closures have had on children academically, learning loss, etc., but also on their mental health. So bridging children back into their learning will need a holistic approach. The bridge will have to be holistic. And holistic means to focus on their mental and psychosocial support, health, but also their nutritional support and physical health, etc. In the vast, we're talking hundreds of millions of children around the world. Nick mentioned some of the numbers regarding IDPs and refugees, but frankly, I think it's such a huge scale now, the challenges children are facing on the psychosocial support, having been cut off from peer interactions and interacting with their communities for months and sometimes years. So first of all, the need to reopen schools around the world is critically important. And we're struggling now, and again, in some countries of only partially opening schools, and now with the new Omicron virus, there are discussions around looking at reclosing schools. That would be exacerbate this incredibly challenging or disastrous situation for children. So reopening schools remains absolutely important. Now, back to the bridge. So recognizing schools have such a critical central role in community life, but in a child's life, and often the only service they access from governments and from communities. We have to leverage that school to the maximum to address these now growing needs of children. So as children bridge back into school, they need to be caught, if you'd like, where they are in their learning, understand where they are in their learning journey, their academic success, foundational literacy and numeracy, and transferable skills, etc. And catch them where they are and enable them to catch up on their learning, but also provide psychosocial and mental health. And sports, I think, can provide an absolute critical part of that bridge. Providing platforms for children to interact with each other and play and learn from each other and argue and constructive dialogue and just engage again. Obviously facilitated by adults where possible, or teens or youth, a great role for amazing, innovative youth we have all over the world. So is it happening? We have some great examples that have been already mentioned. Other great examples like in South Africa, an amazing at-scale intervention across the school system, bridging children back through play first, enabling them to then kind of have a sense of safety and protection and then start their learning again. Or in Brazil, a particular focus on marginalized children and girls, adolescent girls that are at extreme risk now. And the data is shocking about early marriage and early pregnancies and the impact of COVID. And then we have a great program in Brazil at scale with the government and a whole range of partners to provide targeting girls and bridging them back into school, catching them where they are in their learning, and again, holistic support. We have many examples all over the world. Is it yet enough? Is it comprehensive enough? Is it at scale? Is it at scale in high-income countries? Absolutely not. And so that begs the question, why not, when it's so important for each individual's child's life, but also for communities and governments and countries as a whole? Honestly, I struggle to know. The evidence is clear. I think it just requires more leadership, more leaders like the Minister of Education here is about to speak, I know, around the world. But again, I think all of us as partners to learn from each other, to take these great examples, and again, with an overall focus of bridging children back into their learning with the support that they have a right to and they need.
And that makes me think about the conversation that we had a few minutes before this panel with Dr. Pigozzi and all regarding bringing kids back to school will also require to make sure that we are inclusive, that we leave no one behind, but also we make sure that we show innovation and creativity. I want to head back to you, Mr. Honorable Minister, and thank you very much for staying with us. And very briefly, since we are going to the end of this panel, your perspective regarding some of these aspects is really critical. So how do you, or have you installed or instilled the culture of health, culture of sport in your country, but also how did you bridge sport and quality education together? Over to you, Excellency.
Thank you so much. I was having difficulties in hearing you. If you can repeat your question.
Absolutely. I was wondering, how have you succeeded, or how are you instilling a culture of sport, but also bringing together sport and quality education as one agenda in Ghana?
Oh, thank you so much. In Ghana, we see sports as a global activities that required proper intellectual development. And as every good professional must appreciate across cultural concerns such as self-awareness, self-management, personal communication, and education is the only prerequisite for acquiring these abilities. So it's very difficult to separate education from sports. So, and that is why, as a policy, Ghana government, we have free education from the basic level, and that is from the primary level all the way to the second. And the only route we used in identifying our talents, like I mentioned in my earlier submission, is this the schools festivals that we do. So every child is given access. So access is open to every young person in our country. So when you have access, we don't want people to be left out, or people should be identified they lack certain basic skills. So education, there's no way, any attempt to separate sports from education will be a very huge challenge. So as a country, we have recognized that, and we've made it a point to ensure that in our operations, we ensure sports development work very closely with the Ministry of Education to ensure that we give the young ones the opportunity to develop their talent through sports, and we do so from the basic level all the way to the highest level, the university level. So that's the policy direction that we have worked on.
Thank you, Excellency, Mr. Minister. I know time is flying, but your perspective was so useful. I still want to take a few questions from the audience, and I would like, please, if you do have any questions, we have a few microphones on the road. I will only be able to take few questions, but I'm sure few panelists could probably at the end stay and interact with you. So please go ahead straight to your question for the sake of time. Microphone. Feel free to raise your hand. We have one question over here. We'll have the microphone over to Brooke, over to you. Any other volunteer? Sir, two. So let's start with the sir in the front. The sir in the front, and then you in the back, you will be the second. A third and last hand. Ideally a woman. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm the CEO of Education Above All Foundation. I would like to thank you as a moderator and thank you the guest really to be here with us today. We really agree 100% that sport and education is really strong components, to work together. I have experience, just quickly I will share it, for 1 minute, as was mentioning, from PSG today. I started my education in Qatar, but really the skills that I get from sport, I started to play tennis, I've been professional, I've been into a number of academy. I think it's changed my life, since today, still I'm repeating saying, how I position myself, as leader today, as leader of one of the organizations, is really to put in objectives, what my goal, what my positions today, where I am, with the competition, how we are going. So I think really sport has changed my life a lot since, I'm 10 years old, and really trying to think about all the strategic things, I have a coach who told me that every day you need to come, you need to have a strategy, who you are competing with, what we should do, what your strategy. Okay, so a lot of things what we are doing today. So every day we come to the work, it's changing our life. So I believe the skills, for sport and education is really key, to give you and building your capacity to be a leader. Thank you. And this is exactly, it's not a question, just to say, a small comments on that. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. We are thrilled to have you as a CEO, but also to learn from your testimony. And we can see how practicing tennis has shaped your remarkable and outstanding leadership. Thank you for sharing that. Sir?
I'll raise my voice. Oh, here we go.
Perfect.
Okay. Yeah, good. Yeah, my name is Tom Dannett. I'm the Chief Exec of Street Child. We're a global NGO working in 20 countries. And I've just got 2 comments. Yeah, I was in Sierra Leone a few weeks ago, touring schools that Street Child was involved in. And it was the first time I'd been in Sierra Leone for a couple of years. And I was asking staff, teachers, what are the cheap and simple things we could do to make the biggest difference? And I was struck by how many times they said, have you got any footballs, any basic sports materials? Street Child specializes in low resource environments. I spent a lot of my time thinking about, we know that the envelope is mega tight. What can we do that will make the biggest difference? And sport is rising really fast up our agenda. Yeah, I just want to say how excited I was to see this panel being put together as a sort of highlight of WISE, and with the caliber of the panel, attending in person, discussing this. I just want to sort of, pay sort of tribute to Educate a Child and WISE for putting this on with such degree of prominence. And I personally feel really, really encouraged. So those were the 2 points I wanted to make. I've got a third actually. We often talk in long language. Complicated terms in our sector. There's one 3-letter word that I think we could use: fun. Life is for enjoying. Sport is fun, and it's, I think, one of the best things we can do to, for children, just help them have fun, and sport is fun.
Thank you very much. This is remarkable, and it's really, a core concept that we need to ensure in every program. A third and last hand, if any. The lady in red.
Thank you. I'm Tatiana Cobb. I lead the Global Health Mentoring Program, and I teach Global Health. I would like to ask the respected contributors and the leaders on the stage, how can we use the sports diplomacy in making a difference into having, for example, United States signed the Convention on the Rights of the Children? How can we help more activities to go to children that are still within the area on the border of the US? Asking as an American citizen, thank you. And as an ex-UNHCR and UNICEF staff, thank you so much.
Thank you. I know the sir is insistently handing his head. Please go ahead, very briefly, and we have 1 minute to close the panel.
Yes, thank you. I'm Brahim Safa, the founder of Luminous Education. I'm so happy to have this panel about sport, and we all know that how important sport to our mental, to our brain and memory, and it's core. But the question is how to make it at scale, and how to deliver sport as a standard, a scale, and how you personalize that learning, which is the very key factors, and make it affordable.
Okay, thank you. So how do we scale up sport program? How do we use sport diplomacy? Any speaker wants to chime in? Very briefly, in 30 seconds.
I can jump in quickly on the sport diplomacy one. I mean, I think it's a really interesting area. I mean, everybody knows about ping pong diplomacy, but you know, sport has the potential to be a tool for diplomacy. And before the session, we were talking in the other room about this area, and there's been some interesting attitudinal research in the US about sports fans and you know, their likelihood to support a team or a franchise based on its social goals and its social perspective. And I think that, you know, people inherently want to support something that has you know, an outcome that they believe in. Mm-hmm. So I think that, you know, we see a lot more sports diplomacy from sports stars around Black Lives Matters, around the COVID pandemic, and I think engaging teams and sports individuals is a very good place to start.
Thank you. Any contribution on stage or online, very briefly? Okay.
If I may, just very briefly.
Yeah, 30 seconds.
I guess yeah, I mean, when we look at through the foundation how we can sort of affect this change both, and I think it talks both to scale. We're talking about 3 different areas, which is around access, adoption, and collective action. And I think you know, that involves partnerships. It also involves the sport diplomacy piece, which is happening every day through different networks and channels. But I think being particularly clear on what the changes that we want to make collectively will have a lot more impact on the effectiveness of that. So I'd say partnerships, obviously, and also working through existing structures to ensure that uptake, so that it's not just access on a small programmatic scale, but we have the adoption and uptake of cross-sectoral involvement, and then together in that collective action piece, we can affect that change and really have sport recognised to its fullest potential and leveraged to make that impact we all want it to have.
Thank you very much. Distinguished speakers, dear panelists, dear participants, I feel very energized by this conversation and the extensive knowledge and experience shared so far by our speakers. We have discussed the benefit of holistic quality education, its linkage with sport and physical activity, but also the role of government, policy, private sector, foundations, UN agency, refugee-led organization to improve access to quality education and sport. I would like to thank you all for your significant contribution, and I also want to make a call to action. We really want to call the international community to ensure a holistic approach to quality education for all children, including the most marginalized and vulnerable. Please feel free to follow the foundation on social medias and remain aware of some of the work that is going on. Feel free to follow the speakers as well. It was my pleasure. I'm Dr. Joannie Bewa. Feel free to follow me as well on Twitter. And let's continue this conversation because it is the start of many conversations. Holistic quality education, including sport, physical activity, and reaching the sustainable goals should be one and common agenda. It was my pleasure. Thank you so much, and thank you for participating.
Thank you. Thank you, Minister. We have to leave now.
Thank you.
Bye.